Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Aquashella. What year is it? 2023? We're in Dallas. That's all pretty cool. See, I know where I'm at and I know what time it is. So today, check this out. I've got a brand new thing to talk about. So if you've been around the last couple of years and we talked about Lake Tanganyika fish and how to save money, and today we're going to talk about the myths of fish keeping. I have 10 of them for you today that we're going to be talking about. In case you don't know who I am, that's me. I'm Jason Adams. I'm from Primetime Aquatics. We've got a YouTube channel out there. We're all over the internet. We've got Instagram and Facebook. That's part of my fish room. So in case you don't know who I am, I've been fish keeping now for 43 years. That makes me feel really old, 43. But I started when I was like a little kid. Like some little kids out there was like, oh man, I'm keeping my first fish. It was a goldfish. His name was Popeye because he was missing an eye. And he was the only goldfish I wanted. He was a fancy black goldfish with one eye. So I really like fish keeping because it goes with my natural interest in science. I actually went to school and I majored in biology and minored in chemistry. And then I did a master's degree in biotechnology and went on to become a biology professor. I teach biology and microbiology and did a master's cert in aquaculture and fish health. And so yeah, I decided that would be really, really cool and started teaching. And then this just kind of went right along with my lifelong hobby of fish keeping. And so when I started my YouTube channel, I thought, let's kind of bring both of those things together and hopefully do some educational stuff that goes along with all of the science stuff that I have learned over the last couple decades. And so what I wanted to talk about today is the fish keeping myths. Because when you go out on the internet, some of you know, there are differences of opinion. Everybody had that? We're like, let me go ahead and just research this thing about filtration. And you get like 65 different opinions. And you're like, what do we do? And so some of the stuff that's out there, some of the advice is not the best advice in the world, at least in my opinion. And so we're going to cover the top 10 things so that maybe fish keeping isn't quite so stressful or confusing. And so the number one thing, or not the number one, but the number one thing we're going to cover today is you don't need to quarantine your fish. Some of you might have heard that. Ever heard anybody say, you don't need to quarantine your fish, it's stupid, right? Now some of you might not do that. You've lucked out, it's been great, that's okay. That's great. We're not judging you. This is a not judgmental zone. So if you don't quarantine your fish, that's all right, but I'm going to hopefully convince you, if you don't do it, why you might want to start thinking about it, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So this tank that you're looking at here, this is actually one of our quarantine tanks. We bring in a lot of fish. And so probably every 6 weeks, we bring in somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 fish. When the fish keeping season is in full blast, not so much in the summer. And this just happens to be a silver tip tetra quarantine tank. And what we do is we quarantine all of our fish for 4 weeks. That doesn't matter if we're selling them at like a swap or somewhere like this, or we're just keeping them for our own personal benefit. And the reason why we do that is when I did my master's degree in aquaculture and fish health, one of the things that I learned from like the really true experts, the people who are running public aquariums, and if they mess it up, they're losing tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fish in massive, massive volumes, like tens of thousands of gallons, maybe hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. And so if they bring in fish and those fish are sick, they're going to lose their job and we're going to have a serious problem. And so they talked about how when you're quarantining your fish, a lot of places are like, hey, pet stores and things, how long are you quarantined? Well, we got these in 3 days ago. They should be fine. Okay, 3 days, that's interesting. They didn't immediately die. That's good. Or even a week. All right, that might show you, okay, well, no ick has popped up or the really common things. But what I've noticed when I quarantine fish is sometimes things won't show up for 2 or 3 weeks. Some of the internal parasites, sometimes they pick something up from somewhere else and it just takes a long time. I've had fish that I bring in that I think are doing great. 2 weeks later, I'm like, what are those spots? Boom, ick. And then it starts to spread pretty fast. And so even ick, something that we're all used to seeing, we think, okay, well, if I bring them in, after a couple of days, they should be fine. That's not always the case. And so one of the things you want to consider if you're doing quarantine is the length of time. So we do 4 weeks. Also, when you have to treat fish, if they are getting sick, it's a lot easier to treat fish in a 10-gallon quarantine tank. right? As opposed to like a big, 55 gallon or a 75 gallon. I actually went out on the internet and I was looking at the cost of meds. And I wanted to see, okay, well, what does it cost, right? What does it cost to treat fish when they're sick? And so I looked at some of the common stuff, like the Maricin. If you've got like an external parasite, the Maricin 1, Maricin 2 stuff, really, really good. If you've got internal parasites like the Paraclans and XPEL-P, that stuff works really great. But more or less, you're looking at $1 per treatment. And you're probably per 10 gallons, right? So $1 per treatment per 10 gallons. Well, if you buy the things, you're usually going to go through about 5 treatments before most of the directions say you should be okay. So you start doing the math on a 10-gallon tank. It's like, all right, that cost me $5 to treat the fish. If you've got a 29-gallon, well, obviously, now you're at like $15. If you've got a 75 or a 125, you're like, yep, there went all my spending money for the month on this Maricin and this XPEL-P. I hope you guys like it. So the moral of the story is, if you have to treat fish in a quarantine tank, it's a lot less expensive, a lot easier to do, and you're not disrupting other fish. Not only that, but when you start adding meds, sometimes you can mess up your cycle. Some of these antibiotics kill your beneficial bacteria. You don't want that happening in your established tank. Better to deal with that in small volumes in a quarantine tank. All right, so quarantine your fish. That's thing number one. So if you ever hear somebody say you don't have to quarantine, I've never done it, it's always been fine. That's good, I'm glad you've had great luck. Maybe you've had people you bought them from, it's really worked out well. But for the most part, trust me, you'll save yourself a lot of headaches. Number 2, second thing, using fish to cycle a tank. I did a video about this a while back, and I think there were some misunderstandings about what I meant when I say using fish to cycle a tank. What I literally mean is, I just set up this tank, and what I'm going to do to get the beneficial bacteria is I'm just going to chuck a couple or a few fish in there, and hopefully they survive. Now, for those of you who have been fish keeping for a long time, a lot of us did that, right? How many of you have done that before? Because we didn't have any other options. So back in the 80s and 90s, it was like, we didn't know as much about the fish cycle or the fish tank cycling. We didn't know as much about beneficial bacteria. And so this is kind of what we would do. But we learned since then that there are other ways to do things that might be a little bit nicer to our fish, not as drastic. And so this tank here, this is a 20-gallon long. You're going to see this a couple times today. This is a fish tank that Joanna set up, fully aquascaped, brand new. We put in like, I think it was 15 or 20 of these rummy-nosed rasboras. Really cool fish, by the way. And never had an issue, right? And so the reason we don't have an issue is we have found ways to make sure that the tanks are cycled without just dumping fish in there, have them be exposed to high levels of ammonia and nitrite, and then have a problem. And so if you're not properly cycling your tanks before you put the fish in, you're going to wind up with ammonia. How many of you have dealt with an ammonia spike before? It's a little stressful, wouldn't you say? And then it's like, I beat the ammonia. And now you've got nitrite to deal with. Like, oh, come on, this is never going to end. And it can last weeks and weeks. And when you get the ammonia spikes, now you've got a lack of oxygen because that ammonia is destroying fish gills. Now the fish can't breathe, and so ultimately it can lead to fish death. But not only that, when you get the ammonia spikes or nitrite, which does basically the same thing, what winds up happening is now the fish are stressed. And when the fish are stressed, guess what happens to their immune system? It tanks, and now you've got new fish in a new environment. You've got an ammonia or nitrite spike, which means your tank wasn't cycled, and now what do you have to do? See thing number 1, that is add meds. This is why new fish keepers get so stressed. I just got an ammonia spike, now I've got ick because my fish were stressed. Now I've got to treat the ick or the bacterial infection, and what do we say the meds do? Sometimes they crash your cycle, which means this isn't getting any better. Oh, but wait, there's more. Now you've got to do the water changes to get the meds, right? Because it always says, add twice and then do a 25 or 50% water change. But like, well, wait, I got to do the water changes to get the ammonia out, but now you've water changed out all of your meds. Some of you have experienced this before. It's like a nightmare. And then eventually you lose all the fish. You're like, I'm just going to wait a little while. I'll do this again in a few months. Right? It gets really, really stressful. So to combat that, what we do is there's a couple things you can do. There's a couple ways that where a tank like this, brand new tank, can be really successful. 1, cheapest, easiest way on the face of the earth, For a lot of you fish nerds out there, I'm sure you've figured this out already, but for those of you who haven't, use fully cycled media from another tank. As long as that tank has been disease-free for at least 6 weeks, take that media, put it in the new hang-on-back filter, canister filter, maybe it's a sponge filter. You've got your beneficial bacteria in there, and as long as you stock the tank lightly, add just a few fish, you're probably not going to get any kind of an ammonia spike. The other thing that we can do, you see live plants everywhere, right? Live plants will take nitrogen-based products out of the water, so ammonia and nitrite, and then later on nitrate as well after the beneficial bacteria get up and running. So live plants are huge. There's a lot of live plants here. If you're going to use live plants, sometimes it's easier to have the plants that are stem plants. Plants that are going to feed from the water column to lower that ammonia makes it a little bit more useful in a situation like this. Fritzyme 7 or some type of product that has live nitrifying bacteria. That is the key. So if you're ever starting up a new tank, there are a million products out there that claim to enhance beneficial bacteria. It would be preferable if you actually buy the products that have the live nitrifying bacteria, you dump it in the tank, and now they colonize your media, they colonize the surfaces, and now you don't have to worry about them slowly establishing themselves over time. And so we've used stuff like the Fritzyme dozens and dozens of times, and what happens is if you add the fish very slowly, you don't wind up with those ammonia spikes. And so we did all three here. We had a used sponge filter, we had the plants, and then we also had the Fritzyme, and we added all these fish, never had an ammonia or a nitrite spike. So the moral of the story is, if you are establishing a new tank, or you hear one of your friends who's brand new to the hobby, I'm gonna set up this 10-gallon tank, I'm just gonna throw the fish in, maybe it's time to pause and say, wait, hold on, you're gonna have some problems, here's a better way to do it. One of these three ways might be the better way. Okay, number 3. You've heard this one, right? Oh my gosh, fish grow to the size of their tank. That's actually kind of somewhat true, but it's also very not true. So I'm going to illustrate this story. This was Timmy. Timmy's no longer with us anymore. Isn't he cute? Look at those lips. I mean, if he could just come out like, mwah, and that's Chaz. So Timmy and Chaz were Chaz was an Oscar. Timmy was a Nile tilapia. And the story of Timmy was, I got 10 Timmies. They were all this big. They were so cute. And they even had the big lips when they were little tiny fish, which made them even cuter. I got them from a swap or a meeting, like a cichlid meeting. Nobody would buy them. I'm like, all right, I'll buy them. I'll sell them at a swap. At least they don't have to go back. And who knows what people do with fish when they buy them at swaps. Like, I got these little fish, didn't want them. Here they go in with the big fish. So I got these fish, and I put them in a 10-gallon like this big. So fish grow to the size of their tank. Well, Timmy had something to say about that, because Timmy and all of his buddies, after literally like 3 or 4 weeks, went from this big to like that big, like 3.5 inches. I'm like, holy cow, these things are the fastest growing fish I've ever seen. There's a reason why tilapia are like a fish farm food fish, because these things are insane. So after about 4 weeks, I'm like, this swap isn't for another couple weeks. I had to move them out because they were getting larger. But I kept this one because he was the biggest one. That was Big Timmy. And I put him. Okay. So anyway, so I put Timmy in this 125. And again, do fish grow to the size of their tank? That fish, anybody know how wide, not long, but how wide a 125 is? It's like 18.5 inches. That fish, when he would look at me, was nose to the front of the glass, tail to the back, right? The Oscar, you guys, a lot of you have kept Oscars. They're, again, little tiny, they're so cute. I had these guys in a 55-gallon. They were this big within about 6 to 8 weeks. Moved them to the 125. And so the moral of the story is, with fish that grow really fast, they absolutely will outgrow a fish tank. To the point where I'm sure you've seen, like, I remember Ohio Fish Rescue showed that picture of that pacu that was in like a 50, or like a 125 or a 55-gallon, and it was almost sticking out of the water. So, hey, fish for the most part will outgrow a tank. And so the moral of the story is, be mindful of that. You have to be mindful of what type of fish are you keeping, how fast do they grow? Are they like Chaz and Timmy where they're gonna go really, really fast? And like, well, I plan to upgrade my 55-gallon to a 125 at some point. that some point might not be a year down the road. It might literally be like 8 to 12 weeks and like, I got to do something with these guys. But the second thing is, and the reason why I say, well, maybe that's somewhat true, is there are some fish, and we have to be really careful about this with our grow-out tanks, like when we breed cichlids, because a lot of times we'll put the fry in a 10-gallon. And if we leave them in there too long, we've done this a couple of times, it's like, oh, I probably left them in there a little bit too long. It will stunt their growth somewhat, but what winds up happening is they look not quite right. The dimensions are off a little bit. Sometimes their internal parts will grow a little bit faster than the external body parts because they don't have a lot of space. And so you just have to be really careful, because while most fish, they can and will outgrow their tank, in some cases, if you've got fish that are maybe not ideally suited to your aquarium, I'm thinking like goldfish, right? A lot of people like to keep goldfish like, well, I've got a 10-gallon and I just bought some common goldfish. Anybody know how big common goldfish go? Show me, hands, how big? Yeah, they get huge, right? Some of you are like, yeah, I got these things, now they're in a pond, right? And so they can start to stunt their growth. We had goldfish that I got from a school that used to use them not for like bad experiments, but like just getting students used to how to measure oxygen concentrations and stuff. And some of these feeder goldfish that they would buy, they live. And they had them in a 10-gallon for years. They only got to about this big in that 10-gallon tank, and they were like 3 or 4 years old. Now, those who kept goldfish know a 3-year-old common goldfish should be huge. And then when I took them and I put them in a slightly larger tank so I could give them to somebody who had a pond, I put them in a 40. They got just a little bigger, but they were pretty much maxed out. And so they did actually stunt their growth a little bit in that case because it was such an extreme size difference between where they should have been and where they were. All right, number 4. All right, be honest. How many of you kind of tried to do this at one point? You're like, all right, I heard from all the big box stores. This is what everybody's saying. You're doing your little calculations. You're like, all right, I've got a 10-gallon tank. I got 10 inches of fish. Oh, you're trying to figure out how big is this fish going to get. Okay, I've got 10 1-inch fish. I'm good, right? This is a really hard thing for a lot of us. It's a really hard thing to quantify. How many fish can you keep in an aquarium, right? That's the big question. We get that question a lot. Hey, I just got this 55-gallon tank. I upgraded from a 10. How many fish can I keep? And the answer is that's not actually very easy to answer, right? There's a lot of variables that go into that. And so, again, this is that 20-gallon I just showed you. And so 20 gallons, by that rule, you've got 20 inches of fish. Now, just look at the video, right? This is basically just the center. We're not even seeing the ends of the tank. So in this tank, there are actually 20, roughly not quite 2-inch rummy nose ras boards. Uh-oh, I think I just broke the rule, didn't I? And not only that, there were a couple of green cubitai. There might have been some cory cats in there. Oh man, I messed that up, right? We go back to Petco or PetSmart, we're in trouble because they're like, you're like at twice the legal limit, sir, and you're getting pulled over. They're pulling your shopping cart over, and you're done. That's it. It's over. But then you look at the tank, and you're like, that actually doesn't seem too bad. And so there's other things that we're looking at. You have to consider not only the overall length of the fish, but when we're figuring out stocking options, there's more to it. For instance, what's the height of the fish? Right? Let's say you had angelfish. Well, an angelfish might only get about 4 or 5 inches long. So can I put 4 or 5 angelfish in a 20 long? No, because some of them get like a foot tall, right? So there's other things besides fish length that matter. There's also the height. If they're wider body fish, like some of you ever kept like the parrotfish, they won't quite close their mouths, they're all goofy. And so now you've got this big old chunky fish, right? They're all happy-go-lucky. That's a big fish that's got a big appetite. And so yeah, maybe that maxes out at like 6 inches. But again, it's a big bulky fish. Would that look right in a 20-gallon? Of course not, right? So again, when you're looking at how to stock an aquarium, it's not the length of the fish that matters. It's the height, the width of the girth of the fish, but also there's even more than that. So this is another example. This is a 55-gallon aquarium. We set this up. There were 15 4-inch pearl gouramis in here. This is what you see here. Again, this is a small little section of the tank. And if you look at the overall tank, it's not that crazy. It's not ridiculously overstocked, but we blew way by the 1 inch per gallon rule. The things we consider here, another one, the activity level of the fish. That is so important. In fact, that might be the most important consideration when you're looking at what fish belong in which size tank is activity level. Look at the pearl gouramis, look what they're doing. This is what they do. They're not like guppies, right? Guppies like, oh man, I'm super energetic. I just had 4 cokes, boom, boom, boom. They're bouncing back and forth, endless. They're zigzagging up and down. You're like, I'm getting dizzy. This is what these guys do. They're chilled out, they're relaxed. 15 of them. They don't have a lot of activity, so they don't need a ton of space. Unless some fish, they might be more aggressive, right? So that's another thing you'd want to consider. Do they need their space? If you're keeping some South and Central American cichlids, maybe they stay small, but like I'm thinking of pistogramma or rams, right? You get a few males in a 20 gallon, you're like, this is a mess. But yet size-wise, it was fine. You didn't do anything wrong with the size. What happened was they needed space to call their own. And so now the aggression level is something to consider, and that's every bit as important as the activity level. And so now that 1 inch per gallon rule, it's like, well, this is making no sense, because in a 55 gallon, I promise you, if that was 55 inches, I could throw 100 neons in there. And it actually wouldn't look like there's a whole lot going on, right? With just 100 neons. And I went right past that. You know, in a tank like this, anybody ever kept tinfoil barbs? You see those little tinfoil barbs in the pet store? They're like this big. And they're cute, but they are some of the most active fish you will ever find. And they're huge. They get like a foot long. But according to the 1 inch per gallon rule, we'd be okay if we put 4 of them in this tank. And I promise you that would be the biggest disaster I would have ever made, because they're super active. They love to eat. Feeding tinfoil barbs, yeah, crazy, crazy fish, because they're big, they're super active, and that's one of the things we have to consider. And they eat like absolute crazy monsters, right? Easiest fish in the world to feed. Okay, again, aggression. This is an Mbuna tank. Now here I go way beyond the 1 inch per gallon rules, because these guys, one of the ways to actually reduce their aggression is to overstock them. And we'll get those questions all the time, where what do we do with these fish to keep the aggression levels down? And what we do is, in a 75 gallon, we might have 20 or 25, like 4 or 5 inch fish. And so that's how we keep the aggression down, and they don't have a particular area where they're gonna pick on other fish. So again, that 1 inch per gallon rule, it's probably not a good rule. I don't have a great rule because we're considering multiple things, right? When it comes to that 1 inch per gallon rule, it's pretty much garbage. Uh-oh. Oh boy. I'm glad I got this now. I started out on the light subjects. You noticed that, right? I had a lot of head nodders out there. It's about to get real up in here. Are you ready for this? I'm probably going to make some people angry, but just let me finish, okay? Before I start, let me finish. But some of you, this may seem a little controversial. Number 5, your fish don't need a filter. That's a myth. You're like, wait, what? Some of you are already feeling it. Like, this guy, I don't know about him. I've seen a lot of videos out there, people who supposedly don't have filters. You've seen it. I got this guy up here, this 50-gallon low boy. There's an air stone in the center. But you see this all the time. People on YouTube, this is my filterless tank. Check it out. I'm an expert because I don't need a filter. And I'm better than you because I can do all this without a filter. In fact, there's been like big controversies lately about water changes its filters all over the internet. And I'm here to tell you, that's a lie. In fact, I've lied to you too. This tank, I've told you numerous times, if you watch the videos, it didn't actually have a filter on there for like almost 2 years. At least that's what I said. And so it turns out I lied to you. And I'm here to confess. Every tank on the face of the earth has a filter. Every one, even yours that you think is filterless, has a filter. And so let me explain. The nitrifying bacteria that we all rely upon, it's everywhere. It's all over your aquarium. And so when you see somebody say they don't have a filter, what they really mean is they don't have the mechanical device that's pumping water through the tank. But we all have filters because those nitrifying microbes live on the surfaces of all of our aquarium, provided that those surfaces are exposed to oxygen. And so things like driftwood and rocks and all your decorations and the upper levels of your substrate all have nitrifying bacteria. Now, obviously, when you're doing stuff like this, when you don't have a machine, you don't have a piece of equipment that's running water through your aquarium, there are some things you have to consider, and that is when you see a lot of those tanks, the stocking levels are usually fairly light. All right, so that's something to consider if you're ever thinking, I don't need to have a filter. Maybe, but you also, if you're running like the Mbuna tank that I just showed you and you don't have a filter there, I promise you those fish are going to be struggling inside of a week or two. If you've got a really heavily planted and lightly stocked tank, that's going to give you even more success because the plants are pulling out the nitrate and the ammonia and all that stuff. The biggest thing and the most important thing, you know what filters actually do? All of them, whether it's a canister filter, hang on back, when it comes to water quality like ammonia and nitrite, what they're all doing is the exact same thing. They're creating water flow. And that water flow is supplying all the beneficial bacteria with oxygen because they all need it. All of your nitrifying microbes need oxygen. It's one of the biggest problems when your filter crashes. The reason why you have problems is, yes, your fish run out of oxygen, but your beneficial microbes do too. That's why you've got the ammonia spike. And so when you look at a tank like this, it's got this 50-gallon lowboy is 4 feet long, it's 2 feet wide, it's only 10 inches tall. Massive amount of surface area for gas exchange. The little air stone in there, that's what it primarily ran off of. Now, this particular picture, there was a canister filter there that got clogged up after 2 weeks. I hate canister filters because I don't like to clean them, and so I didn't do it for 2 years, and it basically didn't run. And then I pulled it out, I cleaned it, put it back together, it leaked, and then I threw it away. So basically what you need in an aquarium is oxygen. You need water flow. That's what's keeping your beneficial bacteria alive. And so when you see those claims that it's a filterless tank, well, you have to have surface area and oxygen, and that will keep your nitrifying microbes alive. And therefore, the whole, I don't have a filter on my tank, it's a myth, but it's trickery. I tricked you because I just did a play on words because I'm like that. So that's what you're looking for. Okay, we're going to stay controversial. This is one, man, this is the bane of my existence. A while back, a couple years ago, I told everybody on the internet that I clean all my sponge filters in tap water, and I do it every single week. All of them, every one. And if I've got a tank that's got 3 sponge filters in there, I'm reckless. I don't even alternate them. All 3 of them in the sink at the same time every week for decades. And people are like, he's not telling the truth. You're going to kill all your beneficial bacteria. So then, here, that's proof. I was doing the video. That was me cleaning my filters in the sink like I do every single week. And I never had a problem with that. Never, not once. No ammonia, no nitrite spikes, ever. And the reason for that, the scientific reason, when I teach microbiology and what we talk about when we're talking about how we control microbial growth, in the context of microbiology, I'm discussing it in terms of using antiseptics and disinfectants to either eliminate microbes or at least control their growth. And the big overwhelming theme is this concept of contact time. What that is it's the amount of time that the microbes are exposed to the chemical that's supposed to kill them, right? And so in microbiology, we're talking about the antiseptics, disinfectants, things like bleach. But for us, what we're really talking about is chlorine in the tap water. And so for those of you who have chlorinated tap water, I actually did a second video as a follow-up because I was getting so much flack, like, you're lying, man. I'm sure you do something. You're just telling all the people the wrong things so they kill all their fish. Because that's what we want to do, right? Is ruin my credibility. And anyway, I did a video, a second one. And I actually referenced some scientific papers that did studies on contact time and chlorine and how long it takes to kill nitrifying bacteria. And what they did is they looked at how long does it take to kill 99% of the microbes using chlorinated water. By the way, that chlorinated water was chloramine at 4 milligrams per liter, which is pretty much what you got on the high end of your tap water. All right, so that's what the municipalities would use to treat your tap water. And what they found is it was on the order of an hour, almost an hour and a half to kill 99%. Now, granted, you kill 99% of your microbes, you're in trouble, okay? But my point was, and still is, when we're doing this, because we do this every week, and because our filters are not a mess, we can throw them in the sink, squeeze a few times, maybe 10 seconds, right back in the tank they go. So they haven't been soaking in chlorinated tap water for an hour and a half. They've literally been exposed to the chlorine or chloramines for about maximum 15 seconds, and then right back in they go. And so there's not enough contact time. There's not enough time that the microbes are exposed to the chlorine or the chloramines to really do any significant damage. And so we put them back in the tank. We've been doing it every single week. No issues. It cracks me up. So I pay attention sometimes to the Facebook. Anybody like do the Facebook groups on Facebook, like for fish keeping? Anybody ever feel really bad after that? Like you put a post on there and you ask for help, and then you're like, gosh, I don't even know if I should be in this hobby anymore. Everybody just, I wasn't even asking this question. Everybody's telling you how to keep fish and how you're doing it all wrong. But every once in a while, somebody will like tag me. And I don't know if people realize this, but when you tag somebody, now they can see all the comments. It's hilarious. So all about Primetime Aquatics said you can clean in tap water, and there'll be like 50 comments. That guy's an idiot. And I'm like, oh man. So anyway, and then sometimes they'll link this video, which hopefully sets it all straight. But the point is this. It is a myth that tap water is going to kill your microbes, because unless you did, like, I'm just going to soak this sponge filter in chlorinated water for an hour. Yeah, you're going to have a problem. But the other thing is, not only when we do this, again, we just said all of our beneficial microbes are on all surfaces in the aquarium, right? As long as they're exposed to oxygen. So that also means that the things that I have in the aquarium, the driftwood, the rocks, the upper levels of the substrate, are 100% not impacted by what I'm doing here. Now, it may mean that because I've been doing this every single week for many, many years, that there are more beneficial microbes on those other surfaces than there may be in the filter media, or at least more than would normally be. And so it's not a big deal for me to wipe, even if I wipe out 10% of my beneficial microbes, A, it might not have an impact at all on my aquariums, and B, what winds up happening is once you create the space for new microbes to grow, there's different stages of microbial growth. And so they go through this logarithmic or exponential phase of growth, and they do an even better job of clearing that stuff out, the ammonia and the nitrite. So yes, you can clean your stuff. And we do this with everything, not just sponge filters, the sponge in our hang-on backs, the filter floss. If it can't be rinsed out in tap water, right in the garbage it goes. Fresh media goes in along with doing all that. And again, we've allowed our aquariums to establish those beneficial bacteria in other areas. Okay. Whew. What am I going to do now? We're going to get mad? All right. Number 7. Oh, man. Anybody been following this one the last month or two? I just been sitting, you notice I haven't said anything about it, right? I just been sitting back kind of laughing. I'm like, everybody's getting angry and they're getting their feelings are getting hurt. You're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. And finally, for the first time, I'm like, I'm not even involved in this. This is awesome. Letting all the crossfire happen between different people. It's been great for me. I've been loving it. So you don't need to do water changes. That's been the thing, right? That's been the thing over the last couple months. And with these really crazy thumbnails, like, never do water changes again and don't worry about it. Well, let me explain. Yeah, it's been a controversy. And we've got tanks where we don't do water changes. And we have some where we do a lot of water changes. And let me explain why. Can we just simplify this to one word? Nitrates. Nitrates. That's what we're using. Nitrate concentrations to determine whether or not we stick something in the tank to drain water. That's the only thing we use. There are other things in the water you might want to pay attention to, but we kind of use the nitrate concentrations as a... Okay, nitrates. That's what we're using. We are using nitrate concentrations to determine if and when we need to do water changes and how much. The little tanks that I keep showing you here, these little tanks are the ones, if you ever watch our live streams on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, these are the tanks you see behind us every single week. And I've mentioned in those live streams, if you've never watched them before, maybe in the last year and a half that they've been set up, Joanna might have stuck a gravel vac in there a couple times just to kind of spruce it up, but no real water changes have been done. Why? Because now these were when they were first set up. They're very heavily planted, very lightly stocked. And when I test the nitrates, it is rare that they go much above 10 or 15 parts per million. And the plants look good, which means they're getting the minerals and the nutrients that they need. And so if the only reason why I would ever do a water change in these tanks is not because of nitrate, it might be because the plants are missing nutrients that come from the tap water. That's maybe when I would do a water change, but I haven't had to do that. So these tanks, they get nothing. And that's why. A lot of plants, very lightly stocked, nitrate concentrations never have gone past 20 parts per million. So in that case, the people who say don't do the water changes, they're winning, right? They're winning. Those people, they've done it. However, again, 20 parts per million, they're only getting top-offs, okay? We leave the tanks alone. Now, try that with this tank. I'm going to kill all my fish, and you're going to see it if I do that. So this tank requires a 75% water change every single week. We do it once a week. It gets 75%. We're missing the plants. Strike one. Strike two, a lot of fish in a 75-gallon. Strike three, anybody ever had Mbuna cichlids before? Raise your hand if you're part of that crew. Do you love feeding them? We love feeding the Mbuna cichlids because they go insane. Their little tiny pea brains don't remember that they've ever eaten before. And so every time you feed them, it's like the first time. And so they go absolutely crazy for food, which means they're kicking out a lot of waste products, which that eventually gets converted to nitrate. If we let this tank go for more than a couple weeks, those nitrate concentrations start climbing, 40, 60, never letting it get past 60, but it could go even higher. And so when it comes to nitrate, there's two different things that can happen. You can have chronic nitrate exposure or poisoning, and that usually means your nitrates are higher than they should be. And so maybe 60, 80, 100 parts per million. Over time, and I'm not the first one to explain it like this, it would be like if you were just sitting in a room filled with smoke. A lot of people smoking, and you're just sitting there breathing it all in. How good would you feel after a week or two, or a month, or if that was pretty much your whole life? I promise you, you'd probably not be as healthy as people who weren't sitting in smoke in a closed room. Well, that's what's happening in the fish. And once again, their immune system starts to become compromised, and now you've got fish health issues. Then there's the acute side, where the nitrates, they are really, really, really high. Scientific studies have shown, and this is mostly done in food fish, like fish farming, that kind of thing, that fish can experience acute, like life-threatening, like you know how the ammonia spikes happen, like put the fish in, they all died because the ammonia was high? The same thing can happen here with nitrate, but usually that concentration is anywhere from like 400 to 800 parts per million. If your nitrates are that high, your fish could be dying, right? They can start dying. So the point is, when it comes to water changes, nitrates, the key. If you remember nothing else from this, it's nitrates for your water changes, and a nice goal is around 20 parts per million, right? If it gets a little elevated, that's telling you it's time for a water change, right? The idea is you change enough water so that the next time you do the water change, it never gets above 20 parts per million. So it might go down to 10 and gradually creep back up to 20 again, right? So that's what you're looking here. And by the way, your standard filtration, your regular hang-on back filters, your canister filters with normal media, that stuff is irrelevant when it comes to lowering nitrate concentrations. You could put on 67 canister filters with filter floss, and you are not going to lower your nitrate concentrations by even 1 part per million. Because the microbes that do that are generally not going to establish themselves in a meaningful concentration unless you've got specialized media, and there's some out there that will allow you to grow some denitrifying bacteria that will convert all that nitrate eventually back to nitrogen gas. It's relatively rare. Most people don't have the filtration to house that much media that is required. It's much easier just to add plants. So if you're looking to lower your amount of water changes, add the plants. That's way easier to do than try to use some specialized media. So filtration isn't going to help that. It will help the ammonia nitrite, and certainly if you're, whether or not your tank looks clear, but not nitrate. That's you. That's your water changes. Okay, let's get to something happy. Number 8. You ever heard this? Only beginners use plastic plants. Some of you may have heard that and you felt like less of a fish keeper. Like, oh man, I just need to take the next step. I need to be cooler. If I don't use live plants, everybody's making me feel bad. Do you know that I didn't use live plants until probably, I might have had one planted tank as an experiment, maybe like 6 months, a year after I started the YouTube channel. But I've been keeping fish my whole life, and I never really did it. Not because I didn't think I could, I just didn't want to. And so if you're one of those people who are like, I don't want to, that's okay. For some, they're just new to the hobby. And for some of us, it's really hard to remember when we were new to the hobby. And I've got friends that had just started an aquarium. They're asking me questions like, where do I put the filter? Do I need to put the heater in? When do I add the liquid stuff after putting the water in, right?
And that could be you, and that's okay, because those are the questions that we ask, and that's the reason why I exist, is to answer those questions. But we forget sometimes how overwhelming it is just to keep fish alive. And now you're gonna be like, well, hey, new fish keeper, that's a pretty tank, but the plastic plants? This is the Facebook comment. Nice plastic plants. Why don't you try some live plants? And you're like, live plants? I'm just barely keeping these things alive. I'm gonna kill my plants? So if you don't want to do live plants, that's perfectly okay. And by the way, a lot of you keep fish that will eat live plants, like this dude over here on the right, that's Severum. Right? So if we want a little bit of greenery, we want just to kind of look that way, there's nothing wrong with adding some silk or some plastic plants, just to have some green or red or purple, whatever it is you want in your aquarium, because that dude is going to ruin your life if you try to put live plants in your tank. A lot of South and Central American cichlids will do that. African cichlids love to eat plants. And so you have to consider, do you want to bother with it? Are you newer to the hobby? Are you just trying to keep your fish alive? That's okay. If you've got fish in a tank that are going to eat your plants, that's okay too. This is a big one. You'll hear this a lot. A lot of questions we get on this one. Live plants need fertilizer. Well, this is one where that's not really true. This is basically our fish room. All right, you're gonna, as you just kind of glance over, you're gonna see a bunch of our tanks are planted. A lot of them on both sides of our fish room now. And the funny thing is, when we set up a tank and there are plants in the tank, we'll put some root tabs in the substrate because it's a brand new tank. We might add a couple squirts of liquid fertilizer, like 1 squirt per 10 gallons. Squirt, okay, I did the thing. My plants are so happy. All right, we'll do that. And then never do it again. Ever. Never. I have a 1 gallon bottle of liquid fertilizer that I thought I was going to need years ago. You know where it is? It's still in the refrigerator, stuck in the back. I can't eat. I should just throw it away. I can't even get the thing open because you know how liquid fertilizers are? They all crust up. And you're like using all your might. Like, I hope this isn't dangerous. But anyway, it's just there, stuck in the back of the refrigerator because we'd never used it again. I bought I did the whole Osmocote root tabs. You ever done that before? You get the 00 gel caps. It will save you a ton of money. I was really smart when I did that, and I bought 1,000 gel caps and 8 pounds of Osmocote Plus. 8 pounds. I think I've used about 1/10 of 1 pound. And this stuff has been sitting in my fish room now for years. And what I found out was, guess what? Nature does things like feed your plants. And so liquid fertilizer, nope, because the fish are just producing the ammonia and that stuff's eventually getting converted to nitrate and all. Anyway, now I totally forgot what I was saying. Oh yeah, fertilizers. So fish do their thing. They produce the ammonia that gets converted to nitrate for all of my water column feeders. And then they also make the dookies. And that goes in that's fecal matter for those of you who don't know. That goes in the substrate. And then that feeds all of my root feeders, like my crypts and my swords. Oh my gosh, jungle veil. They're like, go crazy. No root tabs whatsoever. Now, there's a caveat to everything I'm saying because some of you are freaking out. It's okay. Some of you are freaking out in the back of your brain like, if I don't use liquid fertilizer or root tabs, my plants die. There's a difference to what I'm doing. All right, so I want to make this clear. For us, everything you see, I've listed the plants that we primarily use. Look at them. Cryptonubias, swords, val, buse, moss, hornwort, guppy grass, wisteria. Most of you, especially if you're a plant expert, say, dude, welcome to the rookie league. That's okay. I'm using plants that are relatively easy to grow. They don't need a ton of light, and none of them need CO2, okay? So everything I'm saying, we're considering easier plants. Once you start adding in, how many of you run like CO2 in your aquariums? Okay, so a few of you are like, this dude's an idiot. But if you're running CO2, your plants start growing a lot faster, right? And maybe you've got some plants that are higher light, and maybe they're missing some trace minerals and things that the fish aren't producing, and you're adding some liquid fertilizers and getting amazing results. But what I am saying is for the really common plants, if you just want to see them and you don't want them to grow like you want to be trimming your tanks every single week, let the fish do their job. You don't necessarily need fertilizers. Now, if you're doing this and you're like, you know what, my plants aren't doing well, and you put a squirt in there, then keep doing that, of course, right? If you're doing something that works, keep doing it. All right, last thing. This is one that breaks my heart, especially on, again, I watch the Facebook post sometimes. I don't ever go on there. So you will almost never see me comment because I just don't need to deal with the abuse. And like, I get enough of that with the YouTube comments. But Algae growth means you're doing something wrong. Do some of you feel like bad? You get some algae growth and you're like, man, I suck. I'm breaking this thing down. Right? Algae growth, it's part of the thing. It's just something that happens to all of us. You want to know something interesting? Why is it that all the really good aquascapers, they show you that tank, these tanks out here, those really sweet ones, they look awesome. And they show you that on YouTube and you're like, wow, I would love to have that in my living room to look at every day the rest of my life. Do you know what those tanks are going to look like in about 3 weeks? There's a reason. Have you ever noticed this trend on YouTube, right? I just set up this amazing tank. That is the best tank you've ever seen. You're like, that's the best tank I've ever seen. And then you never see it again. Or maybe you see it for a few weeks and then also like, I wonder whatever happened to that tank. Hey man, whatever happened to that tank? No answer. Then like 3 months later, it's like, this tank's a mess. I had to break it down. Or let's go ahead and fix it. That's what happens, right? Tanks get algae, all of them. Joanna set that up. It looked beautiful. This was like, I don't know, a month later. Green hair algae. I actually don't mind green hair algae. It's one of the easier ones to get rid of. And it's kind of relaxing. I've ever done it, like do the little twist with the fork or your finger. Anybody ever smell your finger after you do that? You did. You know you did. You're like, you pull the algae out, you got a big old algae ball, and then I don't know what happens, but you're just like, you're like, oh man, it's like a bad smelling algae. So if you're gonna do that and you smell your hand, just know it's gonna stink. But anyway, algae is a normal part of an aquarium. It's something that happens. We learn to manage it. It doesn't often get completely eliminated. Again, we talked about this earlier, nitrates. Keep them to 20 parts per million or less. That will help your algae. It might not make it go away. It just makes it more manageable, right? So you're reducing the amount of nitrate. That can really, really help. Lights. Maybe they're on a little bit too long. Maybe your lights are just really way too strong for the tank that you have. Putting on a big old Fluval 3.0 and you're 20-gallon long with it's only 12 inches tall, you might have to turn that bad boy down. 100% might not be the right intensity. So if you've got a light and you need to turn the intensity down a little bit, that can be a good thing. Now, live plants can either make your situation way worse or way better. If you're new to live plants, you're thinking, they need light. They need all these squirts of fertilizer. I'm going to stick all these root tabs in, and we're going to make it awesome. And then you put way too many squirts in because it's like, one squirt doesn't seem like enough. You're like, 3 squirts was better. And then you get this. You're like, oops. So we learn, right? So on your plants, moderation. Let's see what the plants are doing. Start low, and if you have to build up, that might be the way to go. In the end, if you've got a relatively balanced aquarium, your plants are going to help, right? Especially your fast-growing ones. Whenever we have like big-time algae issues in some of our cichlid tanks, we'll use hornwort or guppy grass, something that grows really fast, sucks all kinds of nitrate out of that tank. So just know it's normal. Sometimes you got to do some elbow work and remove the stuff by hand. There's lots of fish out there. So you got snails, you got amano shrimp, otos, bristlenose, plecos. You've got the Florida flagfish for stuff like this. Lots of options out there to control that stuff as well. So those were just 10 fish keeping myths. Questions? Yes? So the question was, if you don't do water changes, or even if you do, and your tank evaporates, right? That happens. And that was one of the questions my buddy asked because he's brand new to fish keep. He's like, sometimes like the water goes down. There's like this much left. And the question was, can you just top it off, right? That's essentially what we're doing with those tanks in our live streams every single week. Because if I didn't, you'd look at the live stream like within 2 weeks, I'm like, dude, your fish are having a hard time swimming, right? So yes, you can top it off, provided that your nitrates are staying low. All right, I'm being told in the back that we are rapidly running out of time. So how about this? If you have questions, I will stand in the back and I will answer your questions there. But thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate it.